Okay, there were a problem with my headset. I hope that everybody can hear me now. So thanks for joining us today. You are part of the 200 people worldwide who've registered to this webcast. The webcast is powered by Yole Development, and we will present the emerging non-volatile market. My name is David Jordan. I'm part of the sales coordination and customer services from Yole Development. Let me quickly introduce Yole Group of companies. We provide marketing, technology, and strategy consulting, media and corporate finance services, reverse engineering and reverse costing services, as well as IP and patent analysis. So before starting the presentation, let me give you some practical information. You have the possibility during the webcast to submit questions. To do so, you simply have to use the box at the bottom of the screen labeled Ask a Question. At the end of the webcast, we will answer as many questions as time allows us. The remaining questions will be followed up via email. Concerning the materials and the contents of the presentation, please note that they are already available and downloadable in the resources section of the webcast platform. Furthermore, within 24 hours, you will receive an email after the webcast with a link to the recorded session. Today, Yole Development will share their analysis on emerging non-volatile markets. We are pleased to welcome Simone Bertolazzi, Technology and Market Analyst in Memory from the Semiconductor and Software Division at Yole Development, and Ivan Donaldson, Vice President of Yole Finance at Yole Development. So first, let's start with the presentation of the global memory market overview from Ivan Donaldson, VP of Yole Finance. Ivan, please, it's your turn.
Thank you, David. Appreciate it. Thank you, everyone, for joining the call here today live, as well as those of you who may be listening recorded later on. As David mentioned, I'm the VP of Yole Finance. So what I do within Yole is I represent our consulting and research and advisory services for financial clients, including banks, private equity funds, venture capital funds, as well as our finance advisory service for industrial companies within the supply chain, primarily semiconductor related. My background has been substantially in the memory business, and as such, what I'll do here today is spend some time talking about the memory industry from a high level to sort of set the table to then move on to some specifics of the emerging non-volatile memory technology and market opportunity, which Simone will get into substantially more detail on. So with that, what I'll do now is go to the first slide here to give, again, a quick overview of the memory industry in aggregate. We're looking here at DRAM and NAND, which is certainly substantially the bulk of the memory industry revenue and TAM today. Some interesting trends to point out. 2018, we saw a peak industry TAM for both DRAM and NAND, as well as peak gross margins, peak cash flow, peak earnings per share, et cetera. So financially speaking, really an amazing couple of years of upcycle that we've seen in the memory industry. A couple of things that have led to this structural situation. We've seen consolidation over the last 4 or 5 years in the memory business. DRAM is down to 3 players that dominate, roughly 95% of the market. In NAND flash, there are a few more players, but certainly still relatively constrained in terms of the number of participants, with really 4 technology developers in the industry. In addition, what we've seen is the capital intensity of the business has grown dramatically. So in other words, the CapEx required to add capacity, the CapEx required to shrink the process technology has gotten much more complicated. And what that's led to is a restraint on supply growth in the industry. There's been a much more willingness of the suppliers to withhold capacity, withhold expansion, because, again, of the capital required to do that, and the cost reductions are getting harder and harder. Lastly, I'll talk about some of the demand trends here and also later on, but number one to highlight, I think recently over the last 18 months, is really the explosion of the data center driven by hyperscale customers. So both impacting DRAM and NAND. You've seen CapEx with hyperscale data center providers really exploding, up roughly 50% year over year in the first half of 2018. So expansion from a greenfield perspective, think about just bricks and mortar data centers, but also the requirement of substantially more memory within those data centers to fuel the growth. All of those have been drivers for that market to really take off, and is now really the key growth market across both DRAM and NAND. If I fast forward to current trends and looking out to 2019, we are experiencing certainly a downturn. That started a little over a quarter ago for DRAM and roughly 2 quarters ago for NAND flash. So we've gotten past essentially probably the peak of the upcycle. We're now into some down cycle scenarios here, driven by some inventory build in the supply chain, including data centers I just mentioned, and really supply-driven growth as well. We've seen the second half of 2018, in particular for NAND flash, supply has started to grow more rapidly as the 64-layer conversions have come online. So as we head into the first half of 2019, we do expect softening conditions over at least 2 to 3 quarters. Afterwards, we expect there will be some rebalancing as CapEx is slowing. The rate of supply growth that I just mentioned, which has hit a peak roughly late 2018, early 2019, will actually start to slow. And as that occurs in the second half of 2019, inventory is digested, et cetera, we expect the market to begin to come back into more balance. Next slide here, really just to highlight again, similar lines I just spoke about, some downturn in 2019, so we expect revenue to decline. Actually, probably a little worse than what this slide indicates. We will update this data in a few weeks after all the companies present, but the TAM will come down a little bit below this 160 billion range. But over time, as you can see off to the right, we still expect this industry to stay above 170 billion long term. So back to some growth in 2020 after this downturn in 2019. Next slide here, with respect to really looking at the demand drivers broken out by wafer. We could look at this by bits or wafers, but this particular slide is looking at on a wafer basis. You can see the major markets being PC, data center, and mobile in the smartphone category continue to be the major markets driving memory. As I mentioned earlier, data center is certainly the fastest growing of those three, growing well above average for both DRAM and NAND. Lastly, the point I think I want to make here is if you look at the scale on this chart, we're talking about in 2019 approaching 35 to 40 million wafers produced in the industry. There is $40 billion plus of CapEx being spent in the memory industry, as an example. There is just substantial amount of sunk costs and sunk investments in this industry. It's obviously a massive business at 170 billion TAM, as I mentioned before. And if you look at the scale of the wafers that are in the industry, that is important as we think about this conversation regarding emerging memory. There are a number of emerging memories which have been in development for, in some cases, over a decade, that are very intriguing from a technology perspective when you look at the characteristics of the technology in terms of performance, which can enable a lot of opportunities within some of these end markets. Some of the challenges, however, of commercialization of these technologies is fighting against essentially the incumbents, if you will, in DRAM and NAND, which have massive scale, massive investments that have been made in these wafer fabs, billions and billions of dollars, as I mentioned before. So that's something that the emerging technologies have to overcome. clearly. So it's not just the performance, looking at it at a sort of in a controlled environment, in a lab, in a pilot line. It's also having to figure out how to commercialize and scale in large fabs in order to really penetrate this market, number one. And then number two, it's also overcoming the supply chain, which has been sort of used to dealing with both DRAM and NAND flash for 20, 30 years, at least in the case of DRAM, and 10, 15 years in the case of NAND flash. So a supply chain that's been built around the incumbents, if you will. With that said, we're very excited about some of the emerging technology in the industry, including 3D XPoint, which is the technology that is the first real emerging memory to be commercialized. Certainly is in the industry, in the market now after a number of years of development work from Micron and Intel. So this is really notable because it again is the first really new memory to be introduced in since NAND flash essentially. And while the adoption rate is slow moving, there is certainly a substantial market opportunity in the billions of dollars, which is just starting now. And my personal belief is memory semantics in a DIMM form factor today, which could change over time, but essentially a memory replacement is probably the biggest opportunity for 3D XPoint, which Simone will get into some of the puts and takes of the technology. But that's just starting now with Apache Pass enablement from Intel. We expect that the market will really grow from this point forward. Intel has their Optane solution in a DIMM form factor. We expect Micron will have one by late this year or early next year, based on what they've said. And that really is the beginning of the market starting to take off for 3D XPoint, which again we'll get into a little bit more detail as in addition to the other technologies across the emerging memory spectrum. So with that, I'll wrap it up and I'll turn it over to my colleague Simone.
Thank you very much, Ivan. That's a nice presentation. Once again, feel free to ask questions for the Q&A session at the end of the webcast. Now we'll continue with Simone Bertolazzi, Technology and Market Analyst at Yole Development. Simone, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, David, for the introduction, and thank you, Ivan, for describing the general memory market. Actually, you pointed out that there are two mainstream technologies, which are flash NAND and DRAM, and these technologies are dominating the overall memory market. In my talk, I would like to present the emerging non-volatile memory technologies, and I will start with an introduction on the emerging technologies and on their markets and future evolution for the emerging memory markets. So, let me start my talk with a premise on the fact that there are two very different memory businesses. So we should consider the fact that we have a standalone memory business which focuses on chips that are dedicated to the memory function. So we are talking about discrete chips. And in this case, the main players are actually integrated device manufacturers, and we have 5 of these IDMs that are having up to 95% of the total standalone memory business. So we are talking about Samsung, SK Hynix, Western Digital, Toshiba, and Micron. On the other hand, we have the embedded memory technology, which is a different business, and this is actually based on technologies that are like memories integrated onto a chip, like, for example, SRAM integrated into a processor chip, or also we can have memory dies that are assembled into a more complex system through packaging strategies. So in these cases, the players are different. And in the case of emerging technologies, we have a leading role which is played by foundries, which are developing the embedded emerging memory technologies. So in the next slide here, I would like to present the spectrum of electronic memories that can actually be divided in two main categories. As you know, we have the non-volatile memories, which are those that maintain the information even when the power the power supply is removed. And we have on the other side the volatile memories that do not keep the information when the power is removed. So the main volatile technologies are DRAM and SRAM, which are the fastest technologies that are actually in the highest levels of the memory hierarchy. In the non-volatile category of the memory technology spectrum, we have the most important technology, which is flash NAND, and it is based on the original concept of the floating gate field effect transistor. In this kind of devices, the information is stored through the presence or absence of electrons into a layer embedded within the gate stack. Normally is a floating gate layer. So information is stored through electrons. We have now a number of technologies, emerging technologies, that are based on physical principles that are different from the principle of flash NAND. So they are not based on charge retentions, but on other physical principles. So we have, for instance, phase change memory, which is based on the state change amorphous or crystalline within a material. We have magnetic memories, which are based on spintronic or magnetic effects. And we have also resistive memories that are based on other types of physicochemical phenomena occurring within normally an insulating material. So there are also other emerging technologies. Here you can see we have as well ferroelectric memories. In particular, we have the emergence of the ferroelectric field effect transistor, which is based on the use of new insulating materials, actually not so new. We have HFO2, which is a material that is typically used nowadays in the microelectronic industry, but this material can be made actually ferroelectric through some annealing and doping processes. And so this is a new technology that has been developed by the ferroelectric memory company. Is also interesting in the discussion of emerging memories. We will not actually have the time to go into the details here, and we could not also focus on the nanotube RAM. So it's a new technology developed by Nantero in collaboration with Fujitsu, and this is based actually on carbon nanotubes. So a material that has been investigated for more than a decade right now. So the goal for emerging memories actually is to develop a technologies that has the most in terms of characteristics and figures of merit. Actually, we would like to have a memory with high speed, high density, low power consumption, high reliability. But this is actually not possible. This was in the past called the universal memory. So what is possible in reality is to exploit the characteristics of different emerging memories and use them at different levels of the memory hierarchy. So in this slide, you can see a typical memory architecture where we have the SRAM, the fastest memory, which is communicating directly with the processor as it is integrated in the same processor with in the same chip with the processor. And then we have DRAM, which is called also the main memory, which is a standalone technology and actually is lower compared to SRAM, but it provides much higher capacity because the cost is much lower compared to SRAM. So these memories are volatile, and then at the bottom levels of the hierarchy, we have NAND, which is a non-volatile memory technology that provides high capacities, and the cost is significantly lower. However, the problem compared to DRAM is that NAND has a much lower speed. So we can see on the pyramid at the right that there is a significant gap in terms of speed and capacity between DRAM and NAND. And that's actually the place where these new emerging technologies can actually be utilized and find good applications. So there is nowadays the emergence of what is called the storage class memory, which is actually all this set of new memory technologies that can fill this NAND-DRAM gap. Okay, so we have characteristics of these memories that are intermediate between those of the two mainstream technologies. So storage class memory is actually a term that was used at the beginning by IBM to refer to these new storage memory devices that are actually in between working memories and data storage devices. So the goal for these, the near-term goal for emerging memories would be to try to penetrate into the market of a storage class memory. And we actually had the first products that were actually mentioned by Ivan in his talk, that is based on cross-point technologies. It's a phase change memory. And the first products were introduced in the market back in April 2017 by Optane, using the brand name, by Intel, using the brand name Optane. So these technologies can actually provide speed better than NAND, of course, and they have higher density compared to DRAM. Okay, the endurance of these memory technologies is also higher compared to that of NAND. So as you see, we have properties that are intermediate between those of the two mainstream technologies, and at this point, cross-point can actually be used to fill this gap between NAND and DRAM. And that's why it's entering the market. And as Ivan mentioned, we have a takeoff of the sale of these products thanks to the actions carried out by Intel in particular. So the two main products were introduced in 2017 and were memory, essentially storage accelerators based on the 3D cross-point technologies, and we have also solid-state drives. We are expecting for 2019 the emergence of DIMMs, so modules to be connected directly onto the memory bus based on the 3D cross-point technology. And these could find very nice applications within the data center market. So I would like now to give a perspective on the evolution of the emerging non-volatile memory market compared to the overall memory market. As I mentioned before, so the overall market is dominated by flash NAND and DRAM, which are approximately more than 95% of the total market, and total market is approximately 170 billion for 2018. And the emerging memory market is actually a low fraction of the order of 0.2% in 2018. However, we expect it to grow in the next year. And in 2020, what we expect is to achieve a fraction of the order of 1% emerging memory market compared to the overall market. And in 2023, it could be of the order of 3%. So these appear like small numbers, but when we compare this to the overall size of the market, it's still a considerable business. So in the next part of the talk, I would like to give you an overview on the different technologies that are investigated in the Yole's Emerging Non-Volatile Memory report, which are the phase change memory, the magneto-resistive random access memory, and the resistive random access memories. I will try to provide a description of the technology and discuss differences between commercial products that are currently available and mention a few challenges for these technologies. So the phase change memory is based on the principle of changes in the physical state of a material when we flow a current through the material itself. So heating produced into the material can induce the melting, so a process which is called amorphization of the material. And it's possible to restore the original state of the material, which is the crystalline state, by applying another level of current within the material. So this type of technology has been investigated since very long time, actually since back to the 1960s. That was Gordon Moore itself that was investigating phase change technologies for future applications in memory. And the most important players in this area of technology have been Micron and Intel, that within their joint venture, IMFT, established in 2006, they kept investigating this technology and they brought it to reality with Crosspoint. So other companies are also investigating this memory type. For example, ST is investigating phase change memory for application in the embedded technology space, especially for automotive applications. And then other companies are also investigating these technologies for different types of applications, so including SK Hynix, Samsung, and also IBM, Macronics, and new Chinese companies like AMT are active in this technology development field. Then we can discuss about resistive random access memories. As I mentioned before, these memories are based on a variety of physical-chemical principles, and they can be classified according to this mechanism. So we have what are called typically RRAM that are based essentially on the use of an insulating material between two metal electrodes, in which we can have different phenomena occurring, like, for example, the migration of oxygen vacancies and the creation of conducting path. Then we have the CB-RAM, which is also the conducting bridge memory, which is based on the use of an electrolyte type of material where we can have the formation of conducting filaments. Another type of technology is the so-called CMOX that is based on a conducting metal oxide. And in particular, this is based on interfacial phenomena occurring between these conducting metal oxides and insulating metal oxides. So this is just to provide a few examples, but there are different types of resistive random access memory technologies that are being investigated and are brought to close to real commercial products. We have a number of different companies that are studying these types of memories. We should mention that we have already some commercial products on the market that are been like standalone products developed by Panasonic and Fujitsu, and we have also some embedded memory in microcontrollers by Panasonic. Then we have startup companies like Crossbar, 4DS, Webeat that are really developing different types of technologies that can be called resistive random access memory. So then we can talk about the magnetoresistive random access memory. So these technologies has been investigated for a very long time. So we have the first MRAM that have been introduced in the market back in 2006 by Freescale. And this was originally a technology where the switching of the memory state could be induced by magnetic fields. So in the following years, we had new developments in this technology area, new materials, new switching types, and new principles have been introduced in order to induce the switching of memory state. And in particular, so we have the so-called spin transfer torque STT-MRAM memory, which is one of the most investigated nowadays. And the particular type of STT-MRAM is studied nowadays that is the one based on materials that are characterized by perpendicular magnetic anisotropy. So the basic principle for these technologies is on the use of a magnetic tunneling junction. Essentially, we have an insulating material, typically is magnesium oxide, which is sandwiched between two ferromagnetic layers, and we can have a change in the resistance of this magnetic tunneling junction by changing the reciprocal orientation of the magnetization in the two ferromagnetic layers. So we have different companies that are exploring and developing these technologies. We have also products, as I mentioned before. So Everspin is nowadays one of the main provider of MRAM with magnetic field switching, and also we have standalone chips based on STT-MRAM with perpendicular magnetic tunneling junction. So Everspin is collaborating with global foundries for the manufacturing of these chips, but then we have a number of companies which are active in this area, like Avalanche Technology, Spin Memory, TDK, and of course large IDM companies like Samsung and Intel are developing their own technologies. We should include, we shall see later, that also the other foundries are very active in the development of magnetoresistive memories, especially for embedded application in microcontrollers, but also in processor chips. So I would like here to provide an overview of the work that we carried out within Yole for emerging non-volatile memories, which is a comparison among the different technologies in terms of different figures of merit. So at this stage, we could observe figures of merit of commercial products based, for example, on STT-MRAM, those produced by Everspin. So interesting features of the STT-MRAM standalone in this case is the presence of a high endurance. We have also a fast switching for recording information within the memory. And one aspect of STT-MRAM at this stage is still the high cost, but we expect that this could decrease thanks to technology developments in the next few years. So in the standalone business for emerging memory, we have really the phase change memory technology, and in particular the 3D crosspoint, which is taking off and provides very interesting technology features, like, for example, high density. So if at this stage we have 256 megabit for STT-MRAM, although recently Everspin announced also the sampling of the 1 gigabit STT-MRAM. So for 3D crosspoint, we are already at something of the order of 128 gigabit, so using this crossbar type of architecture. And this is a nice feature because actually it can provide higher density compared to DRAM, although it is not yet competitive with NAND type of technologies. Although the PCM technology, 3D crosspoint, cannot provide speed as fast as the STT-MRAM. As you see, we have different features for the different emerging technologies that are being introduced in the market. For the standalone market, we have as well resistive random access memories. As I mentioned before, we have Panasonic Fujitsu standalone memories with still at this stage low density. So we are expecting more development for resistive RAM to come in the next years. So we provide in the next slide also an analysis through spider charts comparing the different types of technologies and try to see whether they can compete with the mainstream technologies. So in terms of prices, you can see the top right. So NAND is still the best technology compared to the other emerging technologies, although we have at this stage PCM, which thanks to 3D crosspoint is achieving a selling price which is lower than DRAM, so intermediate between the two mainstream technologies. We also evaluated the density. You can see that PCM is still in the middle between the two mainstream technologies, and we have nice advancement also for STT-MRAM. Resistive RAM at this stage is still low, but there's still a lot of room for improvement for these technologies thanks to new developments that are achieved by different startup companies and foundries as well. So we do the same type of comparison here for embedded technology. And in this case, in terms of commercial products, we have the microcontrollers using resistive RAM that are commercialized by Panasonic. So we are still at the stage where the technology node is quite large, of the order of 180 nanometers. And the characteristics still have to be improved to use resistive RAM for other types of application. But we can see that we have foundries that are entering also in the resistive RAM business. For example, we have TSMC that recently announced the development of a 22 nanometer resistive RAM technology for 2019. Now we have some project carried out by UMC in collaboration with Panasonic, as well by SMIC in collaboration with Crossbar, for a technology process that could be 49 nanometers, although some delay might be present at this stage, and subsequently we expect also 28 nanometer processes. It's interesting to notice from this table that we have a strong engagement of foundries for STT-MRAM type of technology for STT-MRAM. So you can see that all of the top major foundries are now providing 22, 28 nanometer processes for embedded STT-MRAM. So in this next part of the talk, I would like to discuss about the applications. So for standalone memories, we have nice opportunities for emerging memories for storage class memory type of technologies, and in the embedded space we have a potential for emerging technologies as embedded memory in microcontrollers and cache memory in processors. So I'll try to give you an idea of what are the opportunities for the different types of technologies. First, I will present to you the full spectrum of what we identified to be the main applications for emerging non-volatile memories. On the left, you have the standalone applications, and on the right, the embedded applications. So actually, the first memory chips to appear in the market were those belonging to the segment of industry, transformation, and transportation, consumer electronics. So here the requirements are not so strict, although in terms of capacity at least, although it's important to notice that in this space the memory chips were used particularly for high reliability type of applications. So, for example, the MRAM chips by Everspin with the toggle type of switching were used for this type of market segment. Then in the standalone type of application, we have storage class memory, of course, both enterprise and client, and these are the application targeted by 3D XPoint. Then one technology that we expect for the future, let's say after 2021, is the possibility to use emerging technology also for mass storage. Now we discuss about embedded applications. So one possibility, and actually is the most realistic possibility for emerging memory, is to be applied in microcontrollers, for example, for replacing embedded flash. Microcontrollers are very different. They can be used in different areas, like in the IoTs, low power, in smart cards. They can be used in the automotive technology field, and so on. So there are different opportunities, but what we see is the potential of embedded memory technologies, emerging technologies for non-volatile memory microcontrollers. Then these technologies can also be used as cache memory in mobile devices and also in high-end processors. And especially we foresee that it will be possible for a certain technology to be adopted as last-level cache for replacing SRAM in this kind of processor, eventually to replace EDRAM. And we analyze also in our report certain potential application of emerging memories in artificial intelligence. So we conducted as well a study of the total accessible market for the different types of applications. And you can see that in blue we have the embedded application. In red we have the standalone application. So the most important applications that we can see here are actually in the microcontroller space. So we have the potential of certain technologies to be integrated within microcontroller chips. First, for example, for low power IoTs, and then subsequently we can have also these memories being used for automotive applications. And in the standalone business, we foresee essentially the use of this technology for storage class memory. So on the other hand, what we call as industrial and transportation and consumer electronics still remains a sort of niche market, but still it's going to be tackled by these new emerging technologies. So in these slides here, I would like to present what has been and what we predict to be the evolution of the emerging volatile memory market with a breakdown by applications in the years 2017 up to the end of this year, 2019. So in 2017, we started with a limited emerging volatile memory market of the order of 100 million in total, considering the three technologies, PCM, resistive RAM, and MRAM. And we expect that up in 2019, this market could grow up to something of the order of $1 billion American dollar, with a CAGR of the order of 230%, so which is a very nice growth. And we attribute this growth essentially to the takeoff of 3D XPoint for storage class memory applications, so especially for standalone applications. And this is possible thanks to the dominant position of Intel in the microprocessor business, in particular in the server business, where Intel can actually sell 3D cross-point memory in combination with its new processor, in particular the Xeon Cascade Lake processors. And then, of course, we have a growing memory demand, which is driven by mobile devices, the cloud, big data, and so on. So we have a nice opportunity for the growth of the emerging memory market in the next few years. So the main storage class memory technology is actually 3D cross-point, so that has been developed since 2006 by Micron Intel within their joint venture. And this joint venture is actually over at this stage, and the two companies will pursue the technology development independently. So Micron will continue at the Lehigh fab after purchasing Intel's stake in IMFT, while Intel has to move the development of 3D cross-point somewhere else. So we expect that one possibility is that the development will continue at the New Mexico fab. And what is most interesting for this technology, as I mentioned before, is the introduction of the Optane DIMM for the data center market. And this is the reason that brought us to expect nice growth of the sales of 3D cross-point. So this storage class memory is the most important application for standalone PCM, and we identified other interesting applications for emerging memories. For instance, we think that resistive RAM could be very interesting in applications like neural networks or different types of neuromorphic applications. And the reason is that resistance switching cells can actually mimic the behavior of synapses in the human brain, so they can provide an analog type of modulation of the memory cells that can be used for analog in-memory computing with non-volatile memories. And in this field, we have like Crossbar, a fabless IV company that is developing a sort of 3D cross-point resistive RAM, and this is expected to provide high densities and also the possibility to develop new application based on neuromorphic networks with resistive RAM. So in our report, we made a systematic study also on the supply chain for this artificial intelligence application, and we detailed also the technologies for this type of functions. So other types of emerging memories can be used as well in microcontrollers, and I would like to mention here briefly that the different foundries are developing 22, 28 nanometer process, and this is actually in competition with eFlash that is facing a scaling issue at 28 nanometer. If we want to decrease the technology node for eFlash, the manufacturing complexity increases and also the cost increases. So this is a nice field and nice opportunity for emerging memories is really to replace eFlash for technology nodes below 28 nanometers. And certain emerging technologies, in particular STT-MRAM, might also be used for application as last-level cache in processors, both for mobile devices and also for high-end type of processors. So essentially, we expect that thanks to the high endurance, thanks to the high speed, low latency of STT-MRAM, it will be possible to use this type of memory within the processor chip, and in this way to really speed up the full system performances, which is now limited also by data transfer between processors and memories. So one possible application would be as level 3 cache or also as a replacement of eDRAM. eDRAM is frequently now embedded with the CPU through packaging strategies. One other option for future development of FRAM could be also the use of what is called the spin orbit torque technology in level 2 or level 1 type of applications, but these will require more development at this stage, and it is investigated by various companies. Also in France, we have works by startup Untitled, and some research and development activities are carried out as well at IMEC. So finally, I would like to discuss what are the players' strategies nowadays for accelerating the adoption of emerging non-volatile memory technologies into the market. So with Yole, we performed an analysis of the time to the market activities for the different companies. And for different type of application, we have positions the company according to their time to market. And actually, we provide also this overview that can give information on what are the main applications for the different emerging memory technologies. So one thing we could say that nowadays we have several companies that are active in the standalone industrial and transportation field because the requirements are not so strict. We have the introduction of the 3D XPoint in 2017 with Intel's products, and we are waiting also the introduction of Micron's products. As I said, by the end of 2019, could be possible to see these new QuantX products based on 3D XPoint technologies. And we have also the opportunity, but for the next year, let's say starting from 2021-22, to have, we expect the possibility to use emerging technologies, in particular STT-MRAM as a cache memory in processors, high-end processor and mobile devices. So what we see nowadays is a general tendency by IDMs to try to acquire skills for the development of embedded memory. And the reason is that one approach to reduce the performances of a computing system is to try to integrate the memory as close as possible with the logic part in order to minimize the data transfer between the computing part of the chip and the memory part of the chip. So we have IDMs that are trying to expand their foundry activities. On the other side, we have foundries that are trying to acquire knowledge in the memory business in order to be able to acquire part of the market for the standalone memories. And in order to achieve these skills and know-how to be able to develop their own memories, a good opportunity is actually provided by these emerging non-volatile memory technologies. So collaborations with IP companies is actually a great opportunity for foundries to acquire this know-how and try to move and obtain part of the standalone memory market. So we have a look now in these next slides to the main approach that has been used by companies to introduce emerging non-volatile memory technologies. Of course, these technologies are new. They bring new features, new functionalities, but of course at a higher cost. So it is necessary to find a way to bring them to the market. And the main approach is what we call a Trojan horse strategy. So the new memories are introduced into the market within modules. We can provide a few examples, like we have the NV Nitro storage accelerator by Smart Modular, which is actually based on the use of Everspin chips with 256 megabit. Or we have the IBM Flash Core module, which is an SSD 19 terabyte, which is actually making use of MRAM as a write cache. So as you see, we have a combination of technologies within a module. The same approach used by Intel is actually to sell the obtained memory DIMMs in a bundle for the data center market together with the Xeon processor. We can have a similar look also to the embedded memory business, where we have IP companies that really need to collaborate with foundries that are those that would allow them to integrate their memory technologies within microcontroller chips. Okay, so I would like now to conclude my talk and presenting you a brief summary and overview on the market. So what we believe is that till 2023, PCM can maintain its leadership in the field of emerging memory thanks to the involvement of important players like Intel and Micron. And eventually new players are expected to enter this phase change memories storage plus memory field within the next 5 years. And that's the reason that brought us to expect that the market can grow in the next years, reaching up to $6 billion for the standalone emerging non-volatile memory market in 2023. If we now discuss about the embedded technology, we see good potential for STT-MRAM, especially in the first near term to be used as embedded non-volatile memory in microcontrollers, and in the longer term to be adopted as a cache memory for replacing SRAM at the last level cache. We also see some interesting potential for resistive RAM, although at this stage it appeared to us that resistive RAM is delayed compared to the other emerging technologies, but it can provide interesting application, particularly in the field of artificial intelligence at the edge. And I would like to thank you all for your attention.
Thanks a lot, Simone, for this thorough presentation. Now we'll wrap up the webcast. Okay, and let's begin with a question for Ivan. The first question, Ivan, what is the fallout consequence you see with Intel and Micron divorcing from each other on the 3D XPoint development?
Yeah, thanks, David. A couple thoughts on that. I think, first of all, clearly just from a resource perspective, both companies will have to, independently fund the technology development going forward. So certainly there's ramifications there just in terms of complexity around that, and you're going to have some differences, therefore, I think, in the roadmap and the product solutions that the two companies come out with. And I think some of the ramifications there, clearly, Micron is a company that addresses a multitude of verticals, including not just the data center and the server market, but obviously PC, mobile, and some of the what they would call embedded, but embedded at the more at a chip level and solutions level across memory. Whereas Intel, at least in their memory business, is fairly focused, I think, on the data center market. So I expect that there's probably the roadmaps and the product development will sort of reflect some of those differences going forward. The other ramifications, I think, is just in terms of getting to scale within fabs. It was mentioned in the slides. Obviously, Micron bought out Intel's share of the Lehigh fab, which is producing 3D XPoint today. So we'll have to see where Intel decides to ramp up production, how quickly they do that, and how quickly Micron fills up the Lehigh fab, depending on the demand for the product, obviously. And then lastly, I think, irrespective of the joint development from a technology perspective, just from a market adoption perspective, there's a couple things to highlight as well. That the ecosystem is a bit reluctant to rely on a single supplier, and today that really is Intel, at least within the DIMM market, which, as I mentioned earlier, I think is the biggest opportunity for 3D XPoint. So I think a big question there will be bringing on a second source in Micron over time. Does that give some more comforts to the market to shift to 3D XPoint? We'll have to see. It's certainly one consideration, and probably the reason why there will be some other technologies that try to push into this market that 3D XPoint is in today. That'll be part of the argument, is providing another option besides 3D XPoint, which today is only really Intel today and Micron at some point when they get the DIMM in the market.
Thanks, Ivan. Well, we are a bit late, so we'll ask only one question to Simone. How do you position 3D XPoint in terms of cost compared to NAND and DRAM? And what is the current price per gigabyte? When do you expect a significant decrease to occur?
Okay, thank you very much, David, for the question. So, as I mentioned during my talk, the price for the 3D XPoint is actually intermediate between what we have for NAND and for DRAM. Actually, yeah, I think there's some. Okay, the price is intermediate and is actually now 3D XPoint sold to a price which is approximately half of the price of DRAM, or we expect even less for the case of the DIMM. So the point is actually if the cost is at the same level, but at this stage the cost for manufacturing 3D XPoint are still higher. So Intel, by selling this product, is actually losing money because it's still important now in the next development stage to decrease the cost for 3D XPoint. And this could be done actually through the increase in density that is expected for the next generation of 3D XPoint. So different approaches could be used for increasing the density of 3D XPoint, and we expect that probably they will adopt an increase in the number of layers. Right now we have 2 layers of memory cell arrays, and we expect that these will be doubled in the second generation of 3D XPoint, likely 4 layers. This will allow to improve the density up to 256 gigabit, and we expected also a decrease in the cost. And it's going to be very important for Intel and Micron to decrease the cost in order to make their business on 3D XPoint profitable.
Thanks a lot, Simone. So now the webcast is ending. Within the next 24 hours, you will receive an email that includes the link to the recorded session of the webcast. Feel free to share also our presentation or the link to your colleagues. Also, let me remind you that you will find all our reports on our website, imicronews.com, as well as our NAND and DRAM monitors, our new product. Do not hesitate also to contact us if you have additional questions. We'll follow up with all the remaining questions and send it to you via email. If you need to ask other questions, you can have our detailed contact information on the last slide of the presentation. Thanks a lot for joining us today, and all of you have a good day. Thank you. Bye.